Good morning, students. In the last class, we have discussed about acid, bases and salts in detail. Now, we shall move on to the next part of the lesson, that is reproduction, from the biology section. So, once again, welcome students. So, today we shall move on to the topic, how do organisms reproduce? So, first of all, we shall see what actually the meaning of reproduction. So reproduction is nothing but a process of formation of a new generation of young ones from similar type by the grown-up individuals, which means they are going to produce the same kind of the parent cell. So reproduction, as we know, it is a very important process in all the living organisms because it ensures, number one, continuation of the life, because it's going to responsible for the formation of a new life, or the particular life is going to be continued by the process of reproduction. Perpetuation of the species, that means they are going to maintain the number of species, that particular species is going to be maintained in the nature, that is continuation once again. Replacement of a dead individuals, so whatever the dead individuals are there, that will be replaced by new ones by the process of reproduction. Then the most important thing what we see in the reproduction process, reproduction is because why it is going to be happen is because of the introduction and the transfer of variations. So what is the meaning of those variations here? So variations is nothing but the differences what we see between the parents as well as the offsprings. So that differences between the parents and the offsprings is because of what we call variations, and that variations is being caused due to the process of what we call reproduction. Next, what are the features of reproduction? So what actually the characteristics are there in the reproduction? So the first important thing happens in the reproduction is the replication of DNA. We know that DNA plays a very important role in the process of reproduction. It carries the genetic material, or it is going to carry the genetic information from generation to generation. So this particular DNA is going to undergo a process called replication. Replication is nothing but duplication. What's the meaning of duplication? Making one more copy of the DNA. That is called as the replication of DNA. So that is one of the important feature what we see in the reproduction. Next important thing, reproduction feature is that it undergoes cell division. So reproduction is taking place means the cell is going to be divided. When the cell increases its number, when the cell starts multiply, it undergoes a process called reproduction. So another important feature of reproduction is that during that particular process what happens, many special reproductive structures are going to be developed and there will be a formation of new individuals. And this reproduction is also responsible for the continued growth and the formation of tissues, organs, etc. Yes, the very important thing what happens in the during reproduction is that copying of DNA. So DNA copying is a very important feature in case of reproduction. Because of the DNA copying, we see the differences between the parents and the offsprings. The very important part of reproduction is the DNA copying. So what is this DNA copying? What happens during this particular DNA copying? DNA copying is actually takes place prior to the cell division. We know that in each and every organisms, the cell is going to be divided, and prior to the cell division, DNA is undergoing a process called replication. So when the DNA undergoes replication, when the DNA starts multiplying, or when the DNA producing more number of copies, during that particular time, it is going to produce lot of substances which is responsible for the various cellular activities. So at the same time, during this reproduction, there is a formation of new cells which must carry the same amount and type of the hereditary information as present in the parent cell. So, and this DNA copying is not actually a error-proof process. So these errors, whatever it happens during the DNA copying, will give rise to variations which leads to a development of a new organism. Next, coming to the types of reproduction. We already know that there are two major types of the reproduction are there. What are those? They are sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So as the name indicate, asexual reproduction, which means there is no involvement of any sex. Here there is involvement of only one parent. So from that a new organism is going to be formed without the process called fertilization. And it is formed by a single-celled organisms. Whereas in sexual mode of reproduction, so there will be a formation of gametes, and those gametes are going to be fused by both the parents, so by a process called fertilization, and it takes place in higher organisms including human beings. Next, in the asexual reproduction, we shall look into different modes of asexual reproduction now. So what are the different types of asexual reproduction are seen in the organisms? If we just list for the asexual reproduction modes, there are certain lists. Their common modes are fission, budding, fragmentation, regeneration, spore formation, and vegetative propagation. First, we shall look into the fission. So as the word indicates, fission generally means splitting. So the parent cell is going to divide and formation of a new daughter cells. It may be two daughter cells or it may be more than two daughter cells. So this process of splitting of organisms into two or more than that one is known as what we call fission. So this fission is going to occur in all the unicellular organisms. So basically fission involves two important steps. One is division of nucleus, another one is cleavage of cytoplasm. Once the nucleus is going to be divided and it is followed by the cytoplasmic constriction, what we see in the fission. So now in the fission there are two types are there, which is known as binary fission, another one is multiple fission. As I told already, in the binary fission, as the name indicates, binary refers to two. Here the parental cell is going to be divided into two daughter cells, and this will take place under favorable environmental conditions. We have to remember here, children, so whenever this asexual reproduction is going to be happen in the organisms, that should be happen only under certain conditions. If the conditions are favorable, then that particular mode of reproduction is going to be happen in those organisms. So what actually happens in binary fission? In this process, the nucleus, as I told, it is going to elongate first. The nucleus will elongate and then divides into two. After that particular process, it is followed by what we call the cleavage of cytoplasm. That cytoplasm cleavage, or what we see the constriction of cytoplasm, will take place in between the two daughter nuclei, and that is going to form the two daughter individuals. You can see the picture now, which can take place in amoeba and paramecium. So let us hear the diagram image which shows you the reproduction that takes place in amoeba. As I told, the first one is the parental cell. Second one, we can see the division of nucleus you are seeing there. And after that elongation or the nuclear division, we can see the elongation. There is a constriction is going to take place in the cytoplasm. Then finally it results in what we call two daughter cells. Next, we have another mode of reproduction is known as multiple fission. So multiple fission is another mode of reproduction where the parent divides and splits internally to form a number of daughter individuals. Thereby, it is going to form a surrounding layer which is known as cyst. There will be formation of cyst. Cyst is going to act as a protective layer where the number of individuals are going to be formed. Surrounding that number of individuals, we can see a protective layer, and that particular one is referred as what we call cyst. That can be happen in the multiple fission, and multiple fission occurs in protozoans and certain unicellular algae. The best example you can quote for multiple fission is Plasmodium. You can see the image where the multiple fission is going to take place here. You can see here the parental cell which is going to be internally divide and form what we call the many cells, and surrounding these many cells you can see the protective layer which is known as the cyst, and later onwards those cells will be released in the form of a daughter cells. Next, another important mode of the reproduction is what we call budding. Budding is also another mode of asexual reproduction which we see in the organisms like Hydra and the yeast. Here what happens in this particular mode of reproduction, an individual is going to produce a small protuberance, or also referred as what we call bud, and this, after the development of the bud, the nucleus present in the cell will divide. When the nucleus divides, the nucleus is going to be after the division of the nucleus, the one nucleus will pass on to the bud. Later onwards, the bud grows in size by accumulating the food which is available in the surrounding environment, and then gets separates from the parent and develop as what we call a new individual. So you can see the image of the Hydra where we can see the process of budding. As I already told, in this particular picture, in the first parental cell, we can see the development of the extra protuberance on the side part of the body which is known as the bud, and later onwards the nucleus is going to be divided, and one nucleus will pass on to the bud, and later the bud increases its size by accumulating the food from the surrounding environment, and then the newly individual will get separated from the mother Hydra. Next mode of reproduction is what we call fragmentation. In this process of fragmentation, we can see the organism's body is going to be broken into two or more parts, and each part is referred as what we call fragment, and each fragment later develops into what we call new individual. You can see the example for this is Spirogyra, where we can see the body is going to divide into many parts, and each part we call them as fragment will later develops into a new individual. Next important mode of reproduction is what we call regeneration. Students, you have to understand here is that regeneration, if you just look in detail, the regeneration actually it is not a mode of reproduction, but this is one method where we can see the organisms is going to be developed. Of course, the new organism is going to be developed, but here there is no division. So from the divided part will develop into what we call a new individual, which means that the same organism is going to be again formed here. There is no differences between what we call the parental cell as well as the daughter cells. And this regeneration is actually a process which is going to be taken place because of the presence of special cells which are called as stem cells. So what is actually regeneration? Regeneration is nothing but an ability to repair the injured parts. That's what I told. So whatever the parts that has been injured, whatever the parts that has been damaged, that from that particular part a new organism is going to be arise. So it is due to the presence of, as I told, the special cells, and these cells what they will do, they first proliferate. Proliferate means they are going to divide, they are going to elaborate, and then form a large number of cells. And these cells later onwards undergo differentiation, and they give rise to what we call the various cell types. You can see the image now in the planaria is excellent example which we can see the regeneration process. Here what happens, see here. So there are some special cells are present in planaria which is known as the stem cells. These stem cells what they will do, they proliferate the part which is going to be damaged or which is going to be injured, and from that injured part we can see the development of each part of the organism. It may be head, tail or whatever it is. So you have to remember here is regeneration is actually not a method of reproduction here, but only the regeneration is the property what we see in the living organisms. But in planaria it acts as a mode of reproduction, but in starfish it is not a method of reproduction, it is a property what we see in that particular organism. Next very important method of reproduction is spore formation. This is also another mode of reproduction what we see in certain algae. What happens here? Spores are nothing but a minute unicellular reproductive bodies which actually produce in certain algae, and they are going to store in a particular structure called sporangium. In the sporangium we can see the presence of spores. Once the spores are going to be increased, what happens? The wall of the sporangia is going to be burst, and the spores are going to be released into the nature by a process called dispersal. And those spores are later develops into what we call a new individuals or germination process. You can give an examples like Eulothrix, Rhizopus. These are all the examples you can give for spore formation. You can see the image which shows the spore formation process. As I told, there is a process of you can see the image in the picture, the releasing of the spores from the dispersal mechanism. Once the spores are going to be increased in the number in the sporangium structure, the wall is going to be burst, and you can see the release of spores in the picture, and that spores on germination will develop into a new individual. So with this, students, we completed the asexual methods of reproduction in detail. We are left with one more important mode of reproduction which is called as vegetative propagation, and along with vegetative propagation much more concepts of this particular lesson will be discussed in the next session. Till then, bye, stay safe, healthy, thank you.